At the mall, a little boy excitedly points to a billionaire and says to his adoptive mom, "Hey mom, this man looks just like me." She looks up, filled with curiosity, and is left speechless by what she sees. The mall is vibrant with sights all around. The holiday season is filled with twinkling lights draped over railings and festive music spilling from speakers. A giant Christmas tree stood proudly at the center of the atrium, adorned with glittering ornaments, filling the air with delightful scents. The delightful scent of cinnamon pine and the alluring aroma of pretzels wafting from the food court. Lucas's eyes sparkled as he took in the holiday magic, filled with a sense of wonder that only an 8-year-old could truly appreciate. His hand held tightly to his adoptive mother Sarah's as they joyfully navigated through the bustling crowd. Sarah, ever mindful of their tight budget, held a small list of essentials, leaving out the shiny toys that Lucas was excited about. With excitement in her eyes, she admired every store window she had promised him. They took a delightful break for hot chocolate after their errands, a small treat to enjoy together. Treat she hoped would bring joy to Lucas. With his curly brown hair and wide smile, despite the absence of extravagant gifts this year, hazel eyes looked up at Sarah, his expression filled with excitement. "Mom, can we catch sight of the big tree once more before we depart?" And Sarah's tiredness is momentarily brightened by his enthusiasm. "Absolutely, sweetie. We'll stop by after we're done at the bookstore." Just like they suggested. They made their way past the gathering crowd near the tree, and a voice boomed through the mall speakers, bringing a hush to the lively chatter around. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Brian Cooper, the founder of the Cooper Foundation is here to share about their holiday charity drive." Sarah paused for a moment, feeling a spark of recognition at the name. Brian Cooper was a well-known figure, a tech mogul turned philanthropist recognized for his sharp suits and an air of exclusivity. The demeanor and impressive wealth she had read about his ride to success in the papers, but she was pleasantly surprised to see it in person. As she looked at the stage, her eyes were drawn to a tall, composed man in a sleek navy suit who confidently took the microphone. Lucas's. His gaze followed hers, his eyes narrowing as he curiously studied the man Brian stood with. With a calm and commanding voice, he spoke about the joy of helping underserved children during the holidays, inspiring hope and positivity. He may not have seemed like the typical man to capture a child's interest, yet Lucas eagerly tugged on Sarah's sleeve. His voice was vibrant enough to catch a few people's attention. "Hey mom, this man looks just like..." Sarah's heart fluttered as she crouched down to meet Lucas's curious gaze. "Eyes. What do you mean, sweetheart?" Lucas pointed at Brian, his finger steady and sure. "His face, mom. He looks just like me, same nose, same eyebrows. Don't you see it?" Sarah turned her head back toward the stage, her gaze shifting between the confident billionaire and her wide-eyed son. Initially thought to dismiss Lucas's claim as just a child's wild imagination, the undeniable resemblance caught attention, highlighting Brian's sharp features. Features his defined jawline and piercing hazel eyes that beautifully mirrored Lucas's. That made her stomach twist. But with a bright smile, Sarah gave Lucas's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "It's just a coincidence, Lucas. Many people can look a little different, alike, but it's not just a little." Lucas protested, his voice rising with enthusiasm. "Could it be that he's my real dad?" Sarah felt a rush of excitement as her breath caught and her pulse quickened. Glanced around, noticing that a few onlookers had caught wind of Lucas's enthusiastic outburst, crept into her cheeks as she stood gripping his hand a little tighter. "Lucas, let's go. We need to finish our shopping." "But Mom..." "Now Lucas," Sarah said firmly, her voice radiating confidence and leaving no room for argument. With a hint of hesitation, Lucas let her lead him away from the crowd, though he couldn't help but stretch his neck for one last glimpse. As I glanced at the man on stage, Brian, fully absorbed in his speech, he radiated a captivating energy. Noticed the boys' intense scrutiny as they walked. Sarah's thoughts raced with excitement. She had always been open with Lucas about his adoption, sharing what she could about his birth parents while keeping the essence of the truth alive. She was unaware that his adoption had been finalized with just a few basic details. Regarding his biological mother, a young woman who faced challenges in caring for a child, and there was no information about his father, Sarah had never pressed for more information content to surround Lucas with all the love he deserves. But now her son's innocent observation had stirred something she hadn't expected, a moment of reflection. "Mom, Are you mad at me? Lucas asked softly, his voice gently interrupting her train of thought. Sarah paused and she knelt down, gently cupping his face in her hands, and said, Of course not, sweetheart. I could. I'm not upset with you, but I'm curious about why we had to leave. Don't you want to find out if he's okay? My dad, Sarah, took a moment to find the perfect words. Lucas, just because someone resembles you doesn't mean they're your family. Families aren't defined by appearances, they're about. Love is abundant between us, isn't it? Lucas nodded, his expression still contemplative. But there's so much more to explore. What if he is? What does he want to know about me? Sarah's chest tightened. How could she? She gently kissed his forehead and took his hand once more, ready to explore the situation together. There's no need to worry about that right now. Let's focus on getting you that hot chocolate I promised. Lucas didn't protest, which is great. Sarah could sense the wheels in his mind were still turning as they made their way to the food court. And she felt a sense of excitement. Glancing back toward the stage, Brian was still there, smiling faintly as the crowd applauded his speech, and for a brief moment, his gaze swept over the crowd. Filled with excitement, landed in her direction. Sarah quickly looked away, her heart racing with excitement as she hurried Lucas along that night as she tucked him into bed. Recalling his earlier words, echoed in her mind, this man looks just like me. The resemblance was truly remarkable. She could easily shake off. No matter how much she tried to convince herself it was just a coincidence, it had to be. But deep down a small persistent voice encouraged the thought, what if it's not later? That night. As Sarah sat in the cozy warmth of their modest living room, the day's events danced in her mind like a vivid dream. The resemblance between Lucas and Brian Cooper lingered in her thoughts. She reassured herself that it was just a fleeting thought. Brian was a man of immense wealth and power, a world apart from their simple life. Yet Lucas's innocent words stirred something deep within her, a thread she felt curious about. Unravel in the room down the hall. Lucas wasn't asleep. He lay on his back, gazing up with a sense of wonder. As he gazed at the glowing dark stars on his ceiling, his thoughts danced with exciting questions waiting to be discovered. What was his real family like? Did he have siblings? Why had his mom seemed so uneasy when he asked? Pointed out the man who looked like him. The next morning, Lucas was unusually quiet over breakfast with a bowl of cereal. Sarah observed him intently, noticing that his thoughts seemed to wander, as they often did. Lucas would chatter about his favorite dinosaur or an idea for a comic book, but today he seemed a bit distant. Are you feeling okay? All right, Sarah asked, breaking the silence. Lucas took a moment, hesitating as he poked at his cereal. With a spoon, Mom, do you know who my dad is? Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat. It wasn't the first time Lucas had inquired about his biological parents, but his questions had always been easy to deflect until now. She set down her. With a coffee mug in hand, she chose her words carefully. Lucas, I've mentioned this to you before, regarding your birth. Mom wanted the best for you, so she ensured you would have a loving home, and that's how I became your mom. What a beautiful journey we have together. About my dad, Lucas persisted. Was he gone or something? Sarah sighed, leaning forward to take his small hand in hers. Sweetheart, I may not know much about your birth parents, but I do know that your mom loved you deeply. He appreciated her deeply, and she wished for his safety. Lucas gazed at her, his brow furrowing in thought. Do you think he's still out there? My dad, I believe there's a chance. Sarah admitted. Softly, her voice trembled just enough for Lucas to notice. He nodded, though his expression remained serious for the rest of the morning. But Lucas seemed to be on a journey of discovery, thought, and asking fewer questions, while wearing a thoughtful look that Sarah couldn't overlook by the time evening. As time passed, Sarah felt a mix of anticipation and excitement. The truth was she had chosen to hold off on digging too deeply into Lucas's adoption story with a sense of curiosity, eager to uncover the truth. Even though she felt a flutter of apprehension about what she might discover. What if the answers led to more questions arise about the possibility of encountering someone like Brian Cooper, a man who could transform their lives in unexpected ways? Felt a sense of hope for wanting to keep the past buried, as the thought of preserving the life they built together inspired her. As Lucas diligently worked on his school project at the dining table, Sarah eagerly opened the box she kept, feeling a sense of anticipation in the air. Tucked away in the back of her closet were all the papers from Lucas's adoption forms, official letters, and a single photograph of his birth mother. a young woman with kind eyes and a timid smile. Sarah had cherished that photo. Many times over the years, I searched for clues about the life Lucas might have come from. But there was nothing about a father not included in the paperwork, no name or mention of his involvement. She decided to close that chapter. The box in hand, Brian felt a mix of emotions, ready to embrace the next adventure that awaited him across the city. Cooper sat alone in his expansive office, savoring a glass of scotch while gazing out over the skyline. The boy's face illuminated by the possibilities ahead. He had been on Brian's mind all day, and although he couldn't quite put his finger on it, there was something intriguingly familiar about him. Rarely paid attention to children in crowds, they blended together in a joyful blur of laughter and chaos. But this boy stood out. For a brief moment during his speech, Brian's eyes connected with the boy's, and the world seemed to shine with possibility. It appeared that it wasn't merely the resemblance. There was something in the boy's gaze, a curiosity and intensity that was truly captivating. That mirrored his own. Shaking his head, Brian took a sip of scotch and cheerfully muttered under his breath, "You're losing it, Cooper." After many late nights, he was determined to focus on the paperwork in front of him. Despite his better judgment, Brian found himself compelled to call. As the boy's face kept surfacing in his mind, he reached out to the event coordinator to request photographs from the charity event, a decision he soon wished he hadn't made. Was he even searching for evidence of something he couldn't quite identify back at home? Sarah tucked Lucas into bed after reading his favorite story, gently smoothing his blankets. Lucas reached out and took her hand. "Mom, I don't want you to be sad," he said suddenly. Sarah blinked. "Surprised what gives you the impression that I'm sad?" "You had that expression today when I mentioned the man who resembles me," Lucas whispered softly as if feeling nervous. Sarah's heart ached at his. With a keen sense of understanding, she leaned down, gently brushing a curl from his forehead. "I'm not scared," she said with a reassuring smile. "Lucas, I adore you so much and I truly hope everything stays just as it is." "It will change?" he asked, his voice soft. "It won't," Sarah promised, even as she said it as a part of her. "I believe I'll always be your mom. Nothing in the world can change that." It was heartening to see that Lucas seemed comforted by her words as he drifted off to sleep. Sarah lingered by his bedside a little longer, her mind swirling with possibilities. Amidst the uncertainty, Brian sat at his desk, scrolling through photos of the charity event, and his gaze was drawn to one in particular. Picture a slightly out-of-focus image of a boy in the crowd, gazing directly at the camera with a sense of wonder. Brian gazed at it for a long moment, his heart racing with excitement. He closed his laptop with a decisive snap. With a light sigh and a gentle rub of his temples, he found the situation amusingly absurd. It was nothing, yet as he prepared to leave for the night, he felt a curious sensation that the boy was somehow linked to something greater. Him in a way he was yet to discover. For both Sarah and Brian, the beginnings of curiosity had been planted, and the possibilities for growth were endless. Days passed, and Sarah felt a persistent unease nestled in her chest. Yet Lucas continued to ask occasional questions. He had questions about his birth parents, and his curiosity was clearly sparked by their encounter at the mall. He approached the topic with a gentle eagerness, yet his quiet, thoughtful nature sparked even more concern within her. She had always endeavored to protect him from the uncertainties of his past, and now it appears those very uncertainties are eager to reveal themselves. Late one evening, after Lucas had gone to bed, Sarah found herself sitting at the kitchen table, embracing the quiet moment. With the box of adoption papers in front of her, she hadn't opened it since their visit to the mall, her hands hovering over it, filled with anticipation. The lid seemed uncertain, as if raising it could transform everything. With a deep breath, she opened the box and eagerly began sorting through the documents, including the official adoption certificate, consent forms, the photo of Lucas's birth mother, and she studied the woman's face with curiosity. Soft eyes and a shy smile. There was something wonderfully familiar about her expression, though Sarah couldn't quite place why the papers included a brief letter from the birth mother, expressing gratitude to the adoptive parents for their loving choice. She lovingly took care of her child, with no mention of a father, leaving a sense of mystery about his identity. However, the birth mother's tone, a blend of sorrow and urgency, hinted at an untold story waiting to be revealed. Sarah's hand quivered with anticipation as she reached for her phone, It had been a while since she last connected with the adoption agency. Lucas had come into her life, and now she was excited to seek answers from the woman on the other side. The conclusion was courteous yet resolute, clarifying that due to the nature of the closed adoption, only a limited amount of information was available. It seems like there's an opportunity for sharing. I see that Sarah is expressing her feelings, and that's completely understandable. Is there anything at all that could help me learn more about my son's background? The woman paused thoughtfully. There are notes in the file indicating the birth mother was very clear about not naming the father. But there's an interesting detail here. She left a message with the agency expressing that her child's father may one day be interested in learning about the adoption. She didn't specify him, but she mentioned he was someone who would always leave a lasting impression. Sarah felt a flutter of uncertainty. Do you know what she? The woman said gently, I know it's vague, and I'm sorry we can't. After hanging up, Sarah sat with a hopeful gaze at her phone, eager for more information. Someone who would always be remembered, the phrase echoed in her mind. And she couldn't help but think of Brian Cooper. Her logical sigh indicated that she might be overthinking things. How could this powerful, untouchable man possibly be connected to her son? Yet a feeling deep inside her suggested otherwise, and the uncertainty nudged at her that night, she dreamed of Lucas and Brian standing hand in hand, both gazing at her with their matching eyes. A beautiful sight in the city, Brian found himself pondering his own questions, the image of the boy from the mall bright and persistent in his thoughts, puzzle he couldn't overlook. He had always taken pride in his ability to compartmentalize and concentrate entirely on the tasks lay ahead, but this time it felt personal, even if it shouldn't have. Sleep eluded him. Brian went to his study and opened a box of his own, filled with old photographs and memories from a past he cherished. He seldom permitted himself to look back, yet among the photos was one of her, the woman he cherished. It was just over 8 years ago that I had a brief but intense relationship with someone named Claire, and ultimately challenged by his ambition. Brian traced a finger over the photograph, his chest swelling with determination. Hadn't thought about CLA in years, but now her face was as vibrant as ever. Had left his life unexpectedly, creating a space filled with memories and intriguing questions about the timing of the breakup, along with the boy's age, sparked a thought in his mind that he was hesitant to explore. Yet Brian couldn't let it go. The next morning, he made a call, and his assistant answered cheerfully. On the first ring, "Good morning, Mr. Cooper. What can I do for you today? I need you to find." Someone named Brian mentioned that his tone was clipped when he said Claire's name. I don't have much to add. She lived in the city about 9 years ago, so let's check everything. Records, social media, whatever it takes. Absolutely. I'll dive right in. Brian ended the call and leaned back in his chair, feeling ready for the task ahead. Staring at the photo in his hand, he realized that if the boy was connected to CLA, it was essential for him to know. He felt a sense of determination to move forward. Answers for Sarah as the weight of her own questions transformed into an opportunity for growth. A long day at work, she found herself sitting in her car outside the mall, gazing at the entrance with a sense of anticipation for what was to come. Initially, when Brian Cooper was seen, a part of her considered letting the matter go to shield Lucas from any potential turmoil that could arise if Brian was involved. But another part of her, the part that knew Lucas deserved the truth, encouraged her to move ahead. She stepped forward. Inside, I approached the charity kiosk where Brian had spoken just days earlier. And to my delight, the event coordinator was still there. As Sarah packed up the last remnants of the fundraiser, she paused for a moment and then asked, "Excuse me, do you know how I might contact Mr. Cooper?" The coordinator gave her a curious look. "Mr. Cooper doesn't. Feel free to reach out to his foundation's office in the city, Sarah. It could be a great opportunity to connect." Thanked the woman and walked away, her heart pounding with excitement as the decision she faced grew more significant with every passing moment. What could she possibly say to Brian if she reached out to him? How might she express her suspicions in a way that feels thoughtful and considerate? Later that evening, as Lucas diligently worked on his homework at the table, Sarah sat across from him, cheerfully watching him. His hazel eyes, so bright and full of life, were intently focused on the math challenges ahead. Brian's face appeared in her thoughts once more, and the similarity was strikingly undeniable. "Mom," Lucas asked, breaking her train of thought, "why are you staring at me, Sarah?" With a smile, I'm reflecting on your intelligence. You truly make me proud. Lucas grinned, and Sarah's smile brightened for a moment, but it dimmed as soon as he looked away. She couldn't help but feel a little uncertain. She couldn't put it off any longer. The truth, whatever it was patiently waiting for her and Lucas. Little did she know, Brian was already on the path to discovering the same truth. The threads of their lives, once distant, were starting to intertwine in delightful ways neither of them could have imagined. Brian paced the length of his office, his mind buzzing with excitement as his assistant had reported. Earlier in the day, it was discovered that CLA had passed away years ago, but before her passing, she had welcomed a beautiful baby boy. And Brian was now filled with certainty about his future. The one he had seen at the mall, the private investigator Brian hired, had worked swiftly to connect the pieces. Through dedicated research, the investigator was able to confirm the child's adoption by Sarah, despite the sealed records. Brian now had the proof he needed. Lucas was his son. He sat in his chair, filled with a sense of wonder. Gazing at the investigator's final report laid out on his desk, the boy's name shines brightly. Lucas Whitaker. The papers tell a story, detailed his adoption, the agency's involvement, and CLA's decision to give him up. Brian felt a mix of emotions as he, reflecting on the years spent pursuing wealth and success. He realized that his focus on himself had led to valuable lessons learned along the way. The opportunity to reconnect with his son after so many years filled Brian with a sense of uncertainty. What to do next? The thoughtful, measured part of his mind encouraged him to proceed with caution. He knew he couldn't simply rush in. This child's life, and the father within him, a part he had yet to discover. Action was called for. Lucas was entitled to the truth, and so was Brian across town. Sarah was navigating her own doubts, but she had mustered the courage to reach out to Brian Cooper's foundation. Leaving a carefully worded voicemail that she hoped would resonate, she hadn't expected a response, but to her, what a delightful surprise. Brian's assistant called back the next day to set up a meeting at his office. Sarah felt a flutter of nerves as she, excited to meet Brian. She reminded herself that this was for Lucas felt he deserved answers, yet her heart was filled with concern. What if Brian wanted more than just answers? What if he truly desired Lucas? When she arrived at the, Sarah was welcomed into the sleek, modern office of the towering Cooper Enterprises building, where the man she had seen on stage awaited her. At the mall, he stood by the window, his back to her, gazing out at the vibrant city skyline. Brian turned as she entered, his sharp hazel eyes sparkling as they locked onto hers. In that moment, they gazed at each other, the significance of the encounter evident. Brian's expression brightened as he gestured to a chair. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice calm and inviting. Emotion filled the air as Sarah sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I wasn't sure if Lucas has been asking questions, and I feel it's time to address them, Brian." I nodded while sitting across from her, grateful for her honesty. "I won't waste. I've been exploring this, and I truly believe Lucas is my son." The words resonate with hope. In the air, a weighty presence lingered, and Sarah's breath caught, her fists clenched with determination. To steady herself, if that's true, why now? Why didn't you look for him sooner, Brian? He paused, a hint of guilt crossing his face. "I had no idea he was out there, Claire." She never mentioned that we had a complicated relationship, and when it ended, it seemed like just another chapter of my life when she disappeared, and I had no idea she was pregnant. Sarah studied him, looking for any sign of dishonesty, and found none. "Lucas is my son," she said with determination. "I've raised him since he was a baby, and I believe in my ability to protect him from anyone. Take him from me." Brian's gaze softened. "I'm not here to take him away. I can see how much you love him, and how well you've cared for him is truly heartwarming. I would never want to disrupt his life, but I do want to be a part of it. If you'll let me." Sarah's defenses wavered, and though her mistrust lingered, there was a glimmer of hope for understanding. "You're a remarkable individual with the potential to achieve anything you desire." Brian leaned forward, his voice low but steady, reflecting a deep understanding of the journey of growing up without a father. "My dad left when I was young, and I promised myself I'd never make the same mistakes. Now, I'm discovering new paths and opportunities for growth. I've already missed 8 years of my son's life." And his sincerity truly touched Sarah. Surprise filled her as she looked away, emotion swirling within her, driven by a strong desire to protect Lucas from the chaos this revelation could bring. Yet a part of her was eager to provide him with the answers he sought. "What do you think will happen?" she asked finally. "You arrive, and suddenly Lucas. It involves two parents. And I understand it's not straightforward." Brian acknowledged that it's a bit more complex than it seems. "I'm looking forward to meeting him to explore the possibilities of building something together. I'm excited to follow your lead, Sarah. I hope we can work together and that you'll give me a chance to be part of this journey." Sarah studied him again, this time noticing the vulnerability beneath the polished exterior. She thought of Lucas and his countless questions, and the way he had looked at Brian that day in the mall could open up new possibilities for this man. To truly understand his son and what's best for Lucas, she expressed the need for some time to reflect. At last, her voice was soft yet resolute. "This is not solely about you or me. It's about what's best for Lucas." Brian nodded, understanding. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." Sarah stood, her hands trembling slightly as she left the office, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She had come seeking answers, and now that she had them, and the path forward felt filled with possibilities back in his office. Brian gazed out the window again, his mind brimming with exciting images of the boy he was about to meet. He felt confident about Sarah's. Her hesitations were completely understandable, and he admired her for it. Yet he also recognized one thing is for sure: he couldn't let this opportunity pass him by. He owed it to Lucas and to himself to give it a shot. Sarah spent the next week navigating through a whirlwind of thoughts. Her conversation with Brian had sparked a flurry of possibilities that she couldn't help but explore. Reflecting on his words, his genuine nature, and the way he openly shared his regrets, she could see how deeply he wanted to connect with Lucas, and while she acknowledged the risks of introducing Brian, there was a sense of hope for what could unfold. Lucas's life could bring challenges that neither of them might have anticipated, but Lucas, as always, had a way of. It began with his questions, which have continued without pause. "Mom, did you chat with him, the man from the mall?" he asked one evening as they worked on a puzzle together, his tone light and easygoing. Sarah could see the brightness in his eyes. "I did," she said honestly, her hands pausing over the puzzle pieces we discussed. Lucas's face brightened up. "Really, what did?" he said. Sarah paused, feeling uncertain about how much to reveal. "He believes he might be your dad, Lucas, and I are taking things slowly because I want to ensure this is the right path for us." "The right thing for you?" Lucas's eyes sparkled with a blend of surprise and excitement, flashing across his face. "Does that mean I'll get to meet him?" Sarah smiled, gently brushing a curl from his forehead. "Perhaps, but only if you're prepared." Lucas nodded eagerly. "I'm ready, Mom. I want to meet him." And so, a few days later, they met at a lovely park near Sarah's neighborhood. She had chosen the location thoughtfully, somewhere open and inviting. A public place that wasn't crowded, where Lucas could truly feel at ease. Brian arrived early, dressed in a more casual style than usual. Sarah had ever seen him, his usually sharp suit replaced with a simple sweater and jeans. He looked almost charming, anxious. A clear difference from the calm individual she had encountered in his office. When Lucas spotted Brian sitting on a bench, he paused for a moment, holding Sarah's hand tightly. "Is that him?" he whispered. "That's him," Sarah said softly. "You can go say hi if you want." Lucas let go of her hand and approached Brian with tentative yet determined steps. And Brian stood confidently as Lucas arrived closer, his expression brightening as he knelt to meet the boy at eye level. "Lucas," Brian spoke with a warm yet uncertain tone. "While I'm Brian." Lucas observed him thoughtfully. At that moment, his hazel eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Hi, you're really tall." Brian chuckled, a sound that surprised even him. "Yeah, I guess I am. But I bet you're really fast." "Are you faster than me?" Lucas grinned, clearly excited about the idea. "Probably want a race?" Brian glanced at him. Sarah stood a few feet away, watching with a blend of caution and excitement. Give a small nod, and Brian turned back to Lucas, "Excited to see what you've got." With excitement, the two of them dashed down the path, Lucas's laughter echoing joyfully as Brian playfully pretended to stumble and fall. Sarah watched them, her heart filled with hope. She had been concerned that the meeting might be awkward or overwhelming, but Lucas had a remarkable ability to break through walls, even those that Brian seemed to have constructed around himself. Over the next few, in the weeks that followed, Brian and Lucas had the opportunity to meet a few times, always in a relaxed and easygoing atmosphere. Sarah was eager to be present for each meeting, her protective instincts shining brightly as she observed their interaction. She started to notice something delightful that took her by surprise. Joy Lucas lit up around Brian, his natural curiosity and boundless energy encouraging him to emerge from his reserved shell. Brian found that each meeting was like uncovering a piece of himself he hadn't realized was absent, and Lucas's curiosity sparked that realization. His own relentless drive to learn as a child and his stubborn streak was both challenging and charming. But what really stood out to Brian was Lucas's kindness. The way he sensed Brian's uncertainties and made an effort to bring a smile to his face. Or how he eagerly anticipated sharing stories about his life with Sarah one afternoon. As they sat on a picnic blanket in the park, Lucas turned to Brian with a thoughtful expression. "Do you have a lot of money?" he asked. Sarah stiffened, prepared to step in, but Brian smiled. "I do, yeah." Lucas tilted his head, curious. "Do you buy a lot of stuff with it?" Brian paused, considering the question. Reflecting on the question, "I've come to realize that the most valuable aspects of life are not material possessions," Lucas smiled thoughtfully. Reflecting on what Brian said about spending time with people who matter, Lucas appeared pleased with that answer, while Sarah sensed a tightening in her chest as she observed. The way Brian looked at Lucas showed that his words were not just for the boy, but also a reflection of his own hopes and lessons learned. Evening after Brian left, Sarah tucked Lucas into bed and sat on the edge of his mattress. "Did you have fun today?" she asked. "Yeah," Lucas said with a cheerful smile. "Brian's really cool. I think he's. Do you think he likes dinosaurs too?" Sarah laughed softly. "Maybe you can ask him next time." Lucas yawned and closed his eyes, ready to drift off into a peaceful slumber. He whispered that he enjoys when he's around. Sarah sat with him until his breathing. She balanced her thoughts, recognizing the undeniable bond blossoming between Brian and Lucas, and she found herself embracing it. Wasn't as daunting as she'd anticipated. She had always been concerned that revealing Lucas's biological roots would somehow enhance their bond, but instead it seemed to make him more complete for Brian. These moments with Lucas were truly transformative. He began to see his life in a new light, and the towering office seemed to shine with possibilities. Building the luxury cars. The accolades they received felt insignificant compared to the pure joy of hearing Lucas laugh. Watching him glow with joy over a shared joke after years of pursuing success. Believing it would bring fulfillment. Left by his father's absence, but now he understood that what he truly needed had. One evening, as he sat in his penthouse apartment, he realized what had been missing all along. Out in the city, Brian made a decision. He didn't just want to be a part of Lucas's life. He wanted to be someone special to Lucas. He could count on someone who would take pride in the choices he made, and for that, he understood that positive changes were necessary to build the bridge between Brian and Lucas was still being built, but each step felt more promising than the last. Sarah, though still cautious, felt a sense of excitement that something extraordinary was beginning to unfold. A connection that had been anticipating its chance to shine, and a family transforming in the most surprising manner. Brian's days with Lucas were filled with promise. Become a shining light in his life. Something he eagerly anticipated, the boy's endless enthusiasm and wonder, reminded Brian of simpler, pure times before his life had been filled with power and ambition for the first time in. Years later, he found himself reflecting on what truly mattered, and Lucas was at the heart of it. Sarah had started to ease up, her guard observing the blossoming relationship between Brian and Lucas while she still kept a careful eye on their interactions. She couldn't deny the happiness Lucas felt in having Brian in his life. It was something she hadn't realized her son needed until she saw the change in him, a lightness, a sense of wholeness that hadn't been there before, but life has a way of adding excitement to happiness one crisp. On an autumn morning, Sarah's phone buzzed cheerfully on the kitchen counter. She glanced at the unfamiliar number with curiosity before. On the other end, I was greeted by the voice of the capable and professional Miss Whitaker. "I'm reaching out to share some exciting news. A story featuring your son and Mr. Brian Cooper will be published in tomorrow's paper." Her heart pounding with anticipation about what kind of news was coming. The story unfolds with the reporter hesitating, revealing that Lucas is Brian Cooper's son. There has been some exploration into Mr. Cooper's past, and it seems that details about your son's adoption have come to light. Words struck Sarah with a surprising intensity, revealing truths that were hard to express. It was a moment of realization, filled with possibilities and reflections. Sarah stared at her after the reporter said she deserved a heads-up before hanging up. Phone anticipation building in her chest, she barely had time to process the call before the first knock came at her door. Peeking through the window, she spotted a lively group of reporters gathered on her front lawn, cameras flashing with excitement. Microphones thrust forward. "Miss Whitaker, is it true that your son is Brian Cooper's? How long have you been keeping this from the public, mister? Cooper plans to claim custody," and the questions came rapid fire, muffled through the door but loud enough to make an impact. Lucas, who had been in the living room, came running in with excitement. "Mom, what's going on?" asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Sarah summoned the calm she hoped to convey. "Let's keep him away from the windows, darling. It's just a few people asking questions. Questions they shouldn't be asking." Lucas frowned but didn't argue. His trust in her was evident. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities as she locked the doors and drew the curtains, then grabbed her phone and dialed Brian's number, her hands trembling with excitement. He answered. On the second ring, his voice was filled with care. "Sarah, are you okay?" "No, Brian, It's a bit overwhelming," she exclaimed, her voice trembling. "There are reporters on my lawn asking. There's been some news about Lucas's adoption and our connection to the media." Brian's sharp intake of breath on the other end revealed that he hadn't known Sarah. "I promise, I had nothing to do with this." Who could it be that she interrupted? "Someone must have done it, Brian. Perhaps, and now my son is involved. Is navigating a challenging situation he doesn't fully grasp, but I'll take care of it," Brian said, with determination. "I'll uncover who's responsible and ensure this is resolved." Sarah let out with a wry smile. "You can't change what's already happened, Brian. It's part of the journey with my son. Life is taking an unexpected turn, and I can feel the weight of Brian's silence. The weight of her accusation is clear. Sarah, I truly believe we can work through this together. Please let me fix this. I know you can see it too," she said quietly before hanging up, and for the next few days, life became a whirlwind of possibilities. In the midst of chaos, Sarah decided to keep Lucas home from school, believing it was best to protect him from the media's attention. He was there as the phone rang continuously with calls from journalists and strangers sharing their thoughts about her. Parenting and the need for more information, even trips to the grocery store, can feel challenging at times, but there's always a way to navigate through it. Hounded, Lucas, usually so cheerful and resilient, found himself retreating into his own thoughts. Sarah shifted her focus away from Brian and began to enjoy spending hours in her room with her books and toys. One evening, she discovered something exciting. Him sitting on his bed, joyfully clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur. "Lucas," she said. Gently sitting beside him, she asked, "What's wrong, sweetheart?" He looked up at her. Hazel eyes sparkled with curiosity and a hint of sadness as Brian shared his thoughts with them. "Outside." "No," Sarah exclaimed, quickly pulling him into her arms. "Brian didn't do this. Someone else did, but I assure you it wasn't him." Lucas buried his face in her shoulder. "Then why is this happening? I thought Brian cared about us, and he truly does," Sarah mentioned, gently stroking his hair. "And it's interesting how some people, when they know someone famous like Brian, often seek out ways to connect. It's important to remember that this isn't your fault, Lucas, and it's not Brian's either." Even as she expressed that her feelings towards Brian remained, regardless of his direct involvement. The chaos was a result of his presence in their lives, and she couldn't see the silver lining. Overlooked the impact it was having not only on Lucas but also on their overall sense of security and balance. When Brian called again and Sarah didn't answer, he sent messages apologizing sincerely, and she wanted to see Lucas, but she found it difficult to respond. It wasn't until he arrived at her doorstep one evening, appearing a bit worn and in need of support, which prompted her to finally confront him. "Brian, what are you doing here?" she asked, stepping outside to ensure Lucas wouldn't overhear. "Needed to see you," he said, his voice soft yet filled with determination. "I've been working. I'm working tirelessly to manage this situation with Sarah. I've brought on the best PR team and lawyers, and I'm doing everything possible to address it. Protect you and Lucas? Protect us?" She scoffed. "But I believe there's always a way to move forward, Brian." Lucas feels a mix of fear and confusion as he tries to grasp why his life has unexpectedly become a headline. Brian's face showed a deep concern. I truly wished for something different for him and for both of you. I'm really sorry, Sarah. I promise if I. She expressed a desire to take it all back, but acknowledged that it wasn't possible. Her voice filled with emotion. It's important to remember that this situation involves more than just you, Brian. It also concerns Lucas, my son. And I need to do what's best for him right now. Which means keeping him as far away from you as possible. Brian flinched. It felt like a powerful moment, as if she had struck him. Please, let's not go down this path. Lucas truly deserves to know me and to have this connection. Me in his life, and he truly deserves a normal life, Sarah responded, which he will absolutely have. Have, if you're minute. Brian's shoulders sagged, but there's always a chance for a comeback. I appreciate your perspective and will honor your choice, but I kindly ask you to consider this. Tell him I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Sarah nodded tightly, her eyes glistening with tears as she watched Brian walked away. His usually confident stride transformed into a thoughtful shuffle for a moment. She considered calling him back to clarify that she didn't truly mean it. But then she thought of Lucas and amid the challenges he had faced, Sarah leaned against the door, her heart full of hope, carrying the weight of her choice. She held on to the hope that she was making the right decision, even as doubt lingered, a challenging companion in her journey. The silence that followed the days after Brian left was calm, but not in the way. Sarah was confident that the reporters would eventually thin out and the news cycle would move on. Their lives began to return to a sense of normalcy. And while the rift left in its wake presented challenges, there was hope for healing and growth ahead. Lucas took some time for himself, finding solace in the quiet of his room. And he chose not to ask about Brian anymore, but Sarah sensed there was more beneath the surface. She noticed it in the way he paused before speaking. As if there were questions he was eager to explore, made her wish for clarity in the uncertainty he held. The confusion she couldn't entirely shield him from one evening as she tucked him into bed. He looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. With those wide, searching eyes that always touched her heart. Mom is Brian. Sarah paused, feeling the weight of his question, but she sat beside him with a sense of hope, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. I believe, sweetheart, that Brian truly cares about you. Sometimes, grown-ups have to make tough choices to ensure the safety of their loved ones. Lucas frowned, his small hands holding onto the blanket. I wished he could stay. I could hear Sarah's soft whisper. My voice was filled with feeling as I said, I never wanted to hurt you, Lucas. I'm just doing my best. What's best? Lucas was quiet for a moment, then he said, what if I wrote to him? Would that be okay? Sarah's chest tightened. She hadn't expected this, but she was ready to embrace whatever came next. She could see how much it mattered to him. If that's what you want to do. Of course it's okay. Lucas nodded his head with enthusiasm. Expression resolute. I'll write him tomorrow. The next day, Lucas spent hours. At the kitchen table, he was carefully crafting his letter. Sarah did interfere, though she couldn't stop herself from peeking. Sometimes her heart swelled at the sight of her son pouring his feelings onto the page. When he was finished, Lucas handed the letter to Sarah, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. Can you send it to him? Sarah took the letter and nodded. Even as her emotions swirled with uncertainty and apprehension that night as Lucas. As she slept, she read the letter. It was simple, heartfelt, and completely open in the, Dear Brian, I miss you. I really didn't want you to go. I understand that the people outside were unkind, but I truly believe it wasn't your fault. I'm really looking forward to seeing you again. Can we still be friends? Love filled Lucas as Sarah's hands gently trembled while she folded the letter back into its envelope. She felt a spark of hope in her son's words and realized she owed him the opportunity to explore where it might take them. The next morning, she made the call. Brian's voice was a bit hesitant when he answered, filled with a blend of surprise and optimism. Sarah, I'm calling for Lucas, she said, making an effort to keep her tone steady. He wrote you a letter and wants to see you. There was a pause, then Brian spoke, his voice filled with anticipation, filled with excitement. I'd love to know when and where. Just 2 days later, they met at the same park where Brian had first raced Lucas down the path. This time, Brian arrived early again, but as usual, his polished demeanor had faded, revealing a tired look and a vulnerability that Sarah hadn't noticed before. When Lucas spotted Brian, his face beamed with joy. and he dashed toward him with excitement. Brian knelt to catch him in a warm hug, his arms wrapping around the boy as if he never wanted to let go. "I miss you too, buddy," Brian said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah watched from a distance, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She wasn't ready to let her guard down completely, but seeing Lucas brought a spark of hope. She felt a wave of joy as she melted some of the walls she had built. After a few moments, Brian approached her with Lucas by his side. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me this chance." Sarah nodded, her voice filled with warmth. Unsure yet sincere, "Lucas truly deserves answers, and perhaps you do too. Another chance." They spent the afternoon together, and the tension slowly eased as they talked and laughed. Brian brought a small journal for Lucas, sharing that it was a special place for him to write down all the wonderful things he wanted to share. Questions, stories, anything at all. Lucas embraced it with enthusiasm, already flipping through the blank pages with excitement. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Sarah felt a sense of wonder. She pulled Brian aside and said, "I need to know one thing. What are your intentions? Here, what do you truly desire?" Brian's gaze was unwavering, his voice confident. I want to be a positive part of Lucas's life, supporting him in the best way possible. I'm here to respect what you've created, Sarah. You're his mother, and you've done an amazing job. I'm excited to follow your lead." Sarah studied him for a long moment before nodding. "If we're going to do this, it has to be about Lucas and his happiness. His well-being is the priority, and nothing else matters," Brian said with a positive tone. Determined as they reunited with Lucas, who was happily sketching in his new journal, Sarah felt a hopeful sense of possibility. For all the turmoil and uncertainty, there was a chance, just a chance, that they could make this work. That evening, as they said their goodbyes, Lucas embraced Brian with warmth. "Can we do this again soon?" he asked. Brian smiled, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Whenever you want, buddy." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a spark of peace. While it may not be easy and challenges may arise, she was determined to give it her all for Lucas's sake. The weeks that followed brought a hopeful and steady rebuilding of trust as Brian re-entered Lucas's life, mindful to tread lightly and honor Sarah's boundaries. Their meetings blossomed into simple walks in the park, shared afternoons at the library, and quiet dinners at Sarah's home were moments Brian cherished. Opportunity to show that his promises were genuine, and gradually Sarah began to believe in him. By the time as the holidays approached, Lucas was filled with excitement. He had spent weeks scribbling letters to Santa and drawing snowmen on every scrap of paper he could find, and eagerly asking countless questions about how they'd celebrate for the first time. For Sarah to think about doing something new, something that truly mirrored the wonderful changes in their little family. Lucas suggested inviting Brian to join them for Christmas Eve. Sarah was a bit hesitant at first, but the excitement in the air was undeniable. Lucas's eyes were simply captivating. So one evening, as they were tidying up after dinner, Sarah turned to Brian with a bright smile. "Lucas was wondering if he'd like to join us for Christmas Eve," she said, her voice filled with warmth, steady yet gentle. "Especially if you have no other plans." Brian looked up, clearly intrigued. Surprised. "I'd love to," he said after a moment. "Thank you, Sarah." On Christmas Eve, with snow blanketed the city, turning the streets into a sparkling winter wonderland, Sarah's home was modest yet filled with warmth, with the delightful scent of cinnamon and pine filling the air. Lucas was excited to decorate every corner of the house, and his enthusiasm radiated through the garland playfully strung along the walls and the charmingly crooked star atop the tree. Brian arrived just as the sun set, carrying a carefully wrapped gift under one arm and a plate of cookies in the other. Lucas ran to greet him with a bright smile as he pulled Brian inside. "You're just in time," Lucas said, pulling him toward the tree. "We're about to enjoy Christmas movies." Brian chuckled as he set the gift and cookies on the table. "That sounds wonderful. What's first on the list?" Lucas launched into an enthusiastic explanation while Sarah, as I watched from the kitchen, a soft smile danced on her lips. It was truly a delightful sight to see the three of them together like that. For the first time in a long while, she experienced a wonderful sense of completeness that she hadn't even known was missing. Later that evening arrived as they gathered around the glowing tree, and Lucas eagerly tore into his presents with a delight that only a child can truly express. He gasped with delight when he opened the gift from Brian, a beautiful leather-bound journal embossed with his name. Lucas exclaimed with excitement, running his fingers over the name on the cover, feeling the thrill of it all. Smooth Pages is here for you to jot down anything your heart desires. Brian shared his gentle tone through stories, drawings, and questions, embracing whatever comes his way. Remember, it's your way of celebrating all the incredible things you accomplish, Lucas. He hugged the journal tightly, his smile beaming. Thank you, Brian. It's the best gift. As Lucas dove into another gift, Sarah and Brian exchanged a hopeful glance. Across the room, she nodded slightly, her way of acknowledging the thoughtfulness of his gesture when Lucas finally fell. Asleep on the couch with a half-eaten cookie in hand, Sarah and Brian moved to the kitchen to clean up, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. Christmas music filled the space as they worked side by side, a comfortable rhythm settling between them. Thank you for inviting me, Brian said after a while, his voice low. I know it was a challenge for you to take this step, Sarah paused, drying a plate with a dish towel. It wasn't she. It was a tough decision, but it was definitely the right one. Lucas truly cherishes having you in his life, and I believe it's great for him and for both of you. Brian sat down the cup he was holding, drying and turning to her, his expression sincere. I want you to know that I'll always respect your role as his mother. You've done an amazing job raising him, Sarah. I'm excited to follow your lead, whatever comes next. It seems like she met his gaze, her defenses softening even more, I believe. We're figuring it out, she said softly, one step at a time. Brian nodded with a small smile tugging at his lips. One step at a time. As the kitchen became clean, returned to the living room where Lucas had stirred awake and was happily sketching in his new journal while Sarah and Brian sat nearby watching as he joyfully drew. 3 figures under a bright yellow sun, a boy, a woman, and a man above them in his wobbly handwriting. Lucas wrote to me, Mom and Brian, my dad. Sarah's breath caught. She glanced at Brian, whose eyes sparkled with emotion as he admired the drawing. Neither of them spoke. In that moment, words weren't necessary. The picture conveyed everything perfectly. Family, unique yet genuine. United by love and the silent commitment to always prioritize Lucas as the evening unfolded. As the snow continued to fall outside, Sarah felt a comforting warmth and an unexpected sense of quiet certainty that they were moving towards something better. It wouldn't always be easy, but for Lucas, they would make it work together. 9 strengthening bonds in the weeks after Christmas marked a calm, yet consistent journey. The new year opened up exciting opportunities for Brian and Sarah, marking a positive evolution in their lives, and Lucas to deepen their connection, and despite the challenges, they embraced the journey of discovering what it meant to functioning as a unique kind of family. Brian truly kept his promise and prioritized Lucas's happiness as paramount. So he decided to reduce his public appearances, choosing to take a step back and work more behind the scenes in his company for the first time in years. He confidently entrusted his assistant with the ongoing tasks. Instead of demands for his time, he spent weekends taking Lucas on small adventures, visiting the museum for hours, the science center, or even simple walks in the park. Lucas flourished in this new environment. His natural curiosity and love of learning blossomed as Brian introduced him to new experiences. Sarah observed how Lucas had grown in confidence, his excitement radiating as he shared stories about his time with. On a delightful chilly Saturday morning, Brian picked up Lucas for an exciting surprise outing. Lucas climbed into the car, his cheeks flushed with excitement. Where are we going? He asked. You'll see, Brian said. With a mysterious smile, the surprise turned out to be a visit to a local aviary. Lucas's eyes widened with excitement as they strolled through the expansive domes brimming with vibrant birds of every color imaginable. Brian, delighted in watching Lucas, began exploring each exhibit, eagerly engaging the guides with questions about habitats and diets. It was a delightful experience. Of his son, he cherished this vibrant enthusiasm, this eagerness to absorb the world around him. At one point, Brian crouched down beside Lucas as I saw a peacock displaying its stunning feathers. You know, Brian mentioned that when I was at your age, I dreamed of being a scientist because I was fascinated by learning about animals. Lucas. She turned to him, wide-eyed. You did? Why didn't you become one? Brian smiled. Life has taken me in a different direction, but watching you fills me with hope and excitement. I'm excited to experience that dream a little bit through you. Lucas grinned. And maybe I'll be Brian said softly that he would like to be a scientist someday and that you could help him. Heartful for Sarah. Witnessing this side of Brian was both uplifting and, though it was bittersweet, she had dedicated so many years to protecting Lucas from the uncertainties of his past, and now here was Brian, revealing new possibilities. She realized that she didn't have to do it all alone, and she began to share more about Lucas's life with Brian, opening up in delightful ways she hadn't anticipated. One evening as Lucas worked on, Brian worked on his homework at the dining table and stayed for dinner, which was a delightful and simple meal. Spaghetti and garlic bread created a delightful setting, where the atmosphere was warm and easy as they laughed over Lucas's recounting of his. In the latest school project, Sarah discovered how wonderfully natural it was to have Brian there. The guarded tension that had once defined their interactions had blossomed into something far more comfortable. After Lucas had gone to bed, Brian stayed in the living room, feeling hopeful about what the future might hold. Paused before speaking, his tone surprisingly unsure. Sarah, I understand that this arrangement has had its challenges, and I want to express my heartfelt appreciation for everything you've done. Lucas, and for giving me this chance. Sarah looked at him with a bright expression. Softening, I'll admit I had my doubts about making this work, but seeing Lucas so, it's wonderful that it's worth it. He truly cherishes having you in his life. Brian nodded in appreciation. It's clear that I cherish being a part of his life, and I want you to know that I'm here for whatever you need. Here for you too, for the first time. Sarah embraced the possibility of believing him completely. As the months passed, they joyfully built on their newfound partnership, with Brian making a point of including Sarah in every decision involving Lucas. From small things like extracurricular activities to bigger questions about his. Sarah felt grateful for his respect towards her role as Lucas's mother and she inspired Lucas to fully embrace the wonderful bond he was forming with Brian. On a delightful spring evening, Lucas shared with Sarah a special project he had been crafting in his journal. It was a captivating story about a boy embarked on exciting adventures with his parents, exploring new worlds and uncovering the wonders of the stars along the way. The story tells of a boy who drew a constellation in the shape of a heart, symbolizing the unbreakable bond that connects his family. Sat together reading the story, Lucas looked up at both of them, his smile shy but filled with pride. I made it for us, he said. Sarah blinked back tears while Brian's throat tightened. It's beautiful, Lucas. Brian said, pulling him into a hug just like you did that night as Sarah and Brian stood in the doorway of Lucas's room, watching him sleep. Sarah spoke softly, he's so fortunate to have you. Brian shook his head and said, no, Sarah, I'm the lucky one. In the quiet of that moment, they both realized how far they had come, not just as individuals, but as a family. They embraced their imperfections, and there would still be challenges ahead, but they were united by something stronger than circumstance. Love and the commitment to give Lucas the life he deserved. Together, they were building a bright new beginning, one step a day. As the snow gently settles, the light shines brightly on this chapter of Lucas and Sarah. Brian's journey reminds us that family transcends shared blood. It's all about love, understanding, and connection. With bravery, they embrace the journey of growing together through challenges, nurturing hope, and building trust, ultimately discovering a new meaning of family. Means demonstrating that even the most surprising connections can create the strongest bonds. If you found this enjoyable story of resilience, love, and new beginnings, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll always catch another heartwarming tale. What do you think makes a family? Share your thoughts in the comments. We can't wait to hear from you. Until next time, thank you for watching.